Grab your cocktail and get ready for this episode of the Old Fashioned Masonic Podcast. Welcome to the Old Fashioned Masonic Podcast, where we talk all things Freemasons while drinking an old fashioned. I'm Brian.
I'm Dave.
Dave, as you know, when he's on, we're talking all things history. So we have a topic that is near and dear to our brother Dave's heart. He wants to talk about, and be ready, because I know you Spanish speakers out there, you're about to correct one of us. And I hope you corrected this one. But we're going to find out. So we're going to talk about Simon Bolivar. Bolivar. See, here we go. So Dave, let's get into it and tell us basically why you like Simon and why you think that as Masons we need to know about this dude.
So, thank you. Yes. So, Simon Bolivar is how I've heard it pronounced. I could be wrong. That has only happened one time in my life, and
it was a mistake. It was a mistake.
It was a simple mistake. Mistake. So, but I'm not negating the possibility that I could be wrong.
Right.
So, I am not a Spanish speaker, and so there's a few words that I will not attempt in deference to our Spanish-speaking brothers.
Here we go.
All right, but no, I did not know until you sent me the email that Bolivar was a Freemason, but he has been one of my favorite historical figures. 20 years back when I was heavily involved in politics. He was one of my favorites, partly because of his story is somewhat tragic, but he is the classic case of what happens when a great vision runs into the wall of Congress or representative government.
Right.
So it's a classic story. It's one that reverberates and repeats itself many times, but he is maybe the poster child for that particular concept.
So let's do like we normally do. Before we go and talk, actually, we're going to talk about a little bit about his Masonic stuff because there's not a lot of detailed, and then let's go to him to man. So now we're going to talk about the Mason before the man. So our information that we have, he was initiated in 1804 while in Paris. He had an affiliation with some prominent lodges. He joined the lodge, and in English, it is the Nine Sisters, which is known for its association with prominent Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Franklin. So think about that time when he joined, and these were the visionaries, right? I mean, if you would have had one of us knuckleheads join to try to really kick that off, I don't know that we're inspiring millions, but Franklin, Voltaire, and Simon Bolivar, these were the type of the visionaries that really paved the way for Freemasonry, from maybe my point of view. And Bolivar attended some higher degrees within the Scottish Rite, and from everything we saw, he really had a deep commitment to his fraternity. However, there may be some contradictions that we'll talk about later that some may say don't really align with Masonic principles. So from there, that's just kind of brief synopsis of our brother as a Freemason. But tell us from why you like this guy as a political dude.
One more point, if it's okay, on the Freemasonry side. His involvement with Freemasonry was fairly early on, 1800s, right?
1804.
And so it's about the same time, or a little bit after, of course, Washington and some of our founding fathers also got into Freemasonry, but it's around the time of the Great Enlightenment. The Enlightenment movement was big in Europe, and there's a chicken and the egg type of debate here, whether Freemasonry, early Freemasonry before it was officially became the Grand Lodge of England, there's some debate whether Freemasonry created the Enlightenment movement or if it was the other way around. So chicken and the egg kind of debate, but very clearly they were closely related and intertwined.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think? Do you think Freemasonry created that?
I have to reveal my bias and go with Freemasonry was first, just because I mean, ostensibly we trace it back to the Solomon template,
Sure.
but more realistically, it was at least several hundred years before the official Grand Lodge, and I don't think Enlightenment can trace its roots back as far as Freemasonry.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I'd have to kind of push aside. I would argue if Freemasonry, and because we're always looking to be enlightened, we may not have had that period if it hadn't been for such the push during that time. We could maybe make that argument.
I have made a big argument. One of my Masonic educations that I've given in Lodge is about the Enlightenment movement and Freemasonry, how they intertwine to create the United States and freedom of religion and liberty all over the world. In fact, the major tenets of the Enlightenment movement were liberty, equality, and fraternity. And that should sound very familiar.
It should.
Our brothers, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you. So yes, I wanted to add that in on the Freemasonry part because it really it relates him even more closely, I think, to the founding fathers of our country.
It's interesting. So this is what in my world I'd call he's baiting me. So because he knows I have my notes here in front of me. So I'll be his Huckleberry. So let me take you back. Everyone knows that quote from Tombstone, where Val Kilmer's out on the street and there's a confrontation, and he says, what you hear in the movie line is, "I'll be your Huckleberry," right? For those who don't know, that was a misquote in the movie, right? So the exchange between Kilmer and the other character, basically, it's like, hey, the guy's like, "I'm ready to die," and Val Kilmer's like, "Hey, I'll be your Huckleberry." What the line was in the movie was, "I'll be your Hucklebearer," because back then a Hucklebearer was a pallbearer.
Interesting.
So what the line was, he's basically saying, "Hey, I'm ready to die." And Val Kilmer says, "Yeah, essentially, I'll be your pallbearer." So, fun fact, but that's not what we're going to talk about. Typical rant from Bird, shocker. So I found it interesting in the research. I have an opinion that there are several comparisons between Bolivar and Washington. For example, obviously Washington's known for commanding the Continental Army and through a very revolutionary time in our world. Bolivar led the liberation of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Panama from Spanish colonial rule. So there's some similarities there, a little bit of a stretch there, but they are both considered the founding fathers of their respective nations. So those, I'm going to die on those hills. It's going to get a little looser. I'm about to get shot up. I feel it. Both very visionary leaders. They both have both very accomplished military leaders. They were both known for their tactical brilliance, both with a couple of big battles with Bolivar and especially with Washington and his decisive victory in Yorktown in 1781. So there were some differences, though. So the political roles post-revolution. So Washington reluctantly became the first president. He's like, I don't know, which is always kind of the leader you want, is the ones that don't want to do it. Bolivar actually took more authoritarian type roles. Mm-hmm. So including dictator Peru, the president for life for Bolivia, hence the name, right? And he believed in a strong centralized power. Yes. So that's where some opposites were. So I may be taking our boy's thunder away as he's about to shoot me up here. But the longevity of their views, I would argue, good or bad, they still ring true in their nations today. So fire at me, my friend. Fire at me. I gave you some ammo.
I'm sure this will be much more friendly than what you'd imagine. But no, a lot of people, you are not the only one to compare Washington to Bolivar. And in fact, Bolivar is often referred to as the South American Washington. Right? I just don't think that that's fully fair to Bolivar. And seriously, so the reason why is when you think about our revolution in the North, we had some amazing founding fathers, right? Washington, you already mentioned, was the great general.
Right.
I do take a little bit of objection to the great tactician, because Washington was actually not. He was a great general in the sense that his leadership and development of the troops and those around him, but it was others around him that were the tacticians.
Okay.
It was not that.
Yeah.
I only say that because when he was the tactician, there were several battles where he had embarrassing losses.
He got a shit rock, right? Did he? Yeah.
So anyway, but other than that, the comparison is apt.
Right.
Except that we also had Benjamin Franklin was our great visionary, or one of them, right? But probably
who's better than him as a visionary at the time, right? At the time,
he was probably
he was the Elon Musk. He was the Elon Musk of that time. And Elon Musk, I know you don't watch, so I'm glad you're on our side. I think you're a little bit of an evil genius, but I'm glad that you're pro us. I think.
Fair. So we got Franklin, we've got Jefferson was the wordsmith, and the list goes on, right? We've got quite a few very famous and very, very influential revolutionary figures. Right. Where in the United States, it's difficult to say you could take away one of them and the revolution would have been the same. Where in the South, Bolivar was all of those revolutionary figures rolled into one. Yeah. He was the great general. He was the wordsmith. He wrote the Constitution for at least 3 different countries. It may have been more. I just know for sure about the 3. He was wordsmith. He was the visionary. He at one point stood on the hills of overlooking Rome and vowed that he would never rest until Latin America was free. So he was the visionary for that. But beyond that, he had a vision once he did liberate them to unite them in this. So he was a huge visionary. Yeah. He was also a great general and a great tactician. He performed what military analysts consider one of the top 10 greatest military strategies of all time. Nice. Over the Andes. So, and I'll pull that up in a second. But that is my only objection, is that I don't think the comparison goes far enough for Bolivar, because he was indispensable. Right. Without him, that the South America does not get free, at least not when it did.
So let me maybe counter that. So all of that I agree with 100%, and I agree with everybody that we had. Could it be Bolivar was such the front runner because he was such an autocratic leader that he would allow nobody else to step in? So could there, if he would have been more of a inspirational leader like Washington, would that have empowered some other men in South America to come up and emerge as leaders?
Potentially, but no, I don't think so.
Okay.
His story is replete with him developing the people around him, or creating these relationships with people around him, leaving them in charge while he goes to fix other fires, and they muck it up. Yeah, I'll clean up my language here. Yeah. So, and that was a recurring theme in his life. In fact, the reason he becomes this dictator later in life, I'm kind of jumping ahead, was because every time he fixed a problem and left it to the leaders to maintain, they couldn't. And so in the end, he realized he could not trust Congress. He could not trust representative government to enact his vision. That's why he wanted a strong central government, where he recognized the United States didn't go that approach. They didn't have that really strong central government at first. We do now. But at first, it was a very loose conglomeration of states, right? And he recognized that would not work for South America, because it was extremely diverse down there, racially and status.
Yeah, for sure.
And the difference there was they did not get along. They had very diverse cultures as well, and it just wasn't something that blended, unless, in his own estimation, he had a strong central government that forced them all to stay together. So a lot of historians talk about how his transformation from president, which he was actually president of 3 different countries simultaneously at one point. Yep. His transformation from president into dictator was somewhat reluctant. And it's fairly well documented. He definitely had faults.
Sure.
And I was listening to somebody talk about him recently, and they said that he was such a visionary, and he did such great things for us. But he had his faults, but we remember him for the good things. Well, yeah, that's just natural.
Right.
That's how it should be.
Right.
I do kind of, as a very amateur historian myself, I kind of take objection when people want to point out the flaws in every great leader.
Right.
Because everybody has flaws.
Sure.
You have flaws.
Yeah.
I probably have a flaw. We.
Nice.
But not everybody does great things.
Right.
So everybody has flaws, but not everybody is that great. So we should.
But isn't it human nature? You can have 9 attaboys, but once you get, your ass chewed one time, we get focused on that one thing, or they'll say, "Oh my gosh, what a great year, except for this." Like, wait a minute, we had 11 great meetings, and one was just a turd, so it was a bad year. To your point, but part of that's human nature, right?
Right.
But I agree, and even in the political climate in the world we are now, it's really easy to do that instead of step back and saying, "Okay, let's look at the overall body of work."
Right.
Fair.
Oh, absolutely fair.
Yeah. And I'm guilty of that
as well.
even.
Like, for sure, aren't we all?
Yeah.
Right? Like you said, it's human nature. But it's harder even when you're talking about historical figures that are that far removed from our time.
Right.
Because I hate the standards of morality. I hate to put it that way, but they're different. Right.
Sure.
I mean, things that
and they evolve over time. What was accepted in this norm now is all of a sudden like, I can't believe that was the way it was.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
We drank dirty water. That's why we didn't live as long.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they were open brothels because that was just the norm. Right. I mean, there were just things that were different. It doesn't mean it was wrong. And just like anything, if we don't like it, we put laws in place and we change it. No different than Freemasonry, guys. If there's something within the body you don't like, you take it to Grand Lodge, you do a proposal, and you change everything, right? It's not that hard. So what Masonry looked like in the late 1700s and early 1800s, the guys there, if they would look in, they would probably lose their soul, right? Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they said, you know what, these guys have finally fixed it.
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
So what else? So tell us what else we should know about your boy.
Well, again, somewhat tragic figure. He was born wealthy.
Yes.
In fact, one of the most wealthy families in the world.
Known as an aristocrat.
Yes, very much so. But he ended up dying penniless and exiled. So a bit of a tragic figure, but I mean, if he just ended right after the revolution, it would have been one of the happiest stories ever. But that being said, paint the picture of South America at that time. We think of South America, I guess I think of South America as, the Amazon and just wilderness. And we still have tribes down there that do not have interaction.
Sure, absolutely.
So, but in reality, South America at that time was more populated than the United States. They had almost double our population.
Right.
Caracas was about 40,000 people. Which,
a lot of Catholics.
Fair. Caracas had about 40,000 people, which today is a suburb of Wichita, but back then was one of the largest cities, at least on the Western Hemisphere, considering New York was only 60,000 people at that time, but one of the larger economic centers in the world. And so
mainly because of a lot of trade that was happening through there.
Oh yeah, the mines, gold and silver mines, all kinds of minerals and the stuff coming out of South America, spices being discovered. I think that's about the time that chocolate was introduced.
Oh, really? Okay.
Don't quote me on that.
Or some sort of coca leaf. So
yeah, definitely. But yes, it wasn't. Well, this is a guy who had everything, I guess is the picture I'm trying to paint. One of the wealthiest and oldest families in that huge metropolis area. So he had all of that going for him. And just like when we discussed the founding fathers, and we talked about how those were the billionaires of their time, he was definitely that, and gave it all up to go after freedom, just like a lot of our revolutionaries. And that is a quality that
So you think it was a noble thing why he did this?
I do. He made two great promises in his life.
Okay.
The first one was when he brought his wife home from Europe and she died almost instantly of yellow fever. He promised he would never marry again, and he kept that promise. Although he had many, many mistresses after that,
Right.
Which again,
are they a mistress if you're not married? Or they
in his case,
just
yeah.
side pieces?
I read a book about 20 years ago about his mistresses. It wasn't a big book, but
Right.
Very, very interesting. They had an inescapable part of his story. In fact, I'll share briefly, but I don't remember the details of it exactly. One of his mistresses averted or thwarted an assassination attempt on him in his room. There were several assassination attempts in his room, but this one, the little 4'11", 100-pound mistress thwarted a South American ninja with her boomstick. And so, just wild.
Boomstick?
Broomstick.
Okay, I was like, wait, what?
I don't know.
Well, that's so. So she had happened to she rode into the window and stopped on the broom, and she's like, "Hey, I'm here." And then somebody busted in, and she used it as a weapon.
Something to that degree, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So let me ask you. I'm going to challenge.
Oh, yeah. So sorry. That was his first promise.
Okay. Oh, the
Second
yellow fever,
promise,
right? Not to marry.
When he was in Europe, he became enamored with Napoleon.
Okay.
Napoleon was kind of his guiding light in how to bring liberty to a place and then how to govern it. But he quickly lost his admiration of Napoleon when Napoleon made himself emperor and then deposed the king of Spain and put Napoleon's own brother into that throne.
What's it called when you meet your hero and you're just... and all of a sudden you're let down? There's some like a hero syndrome, heroes do. Basically, you never want to go meet your hero because you might be let down, right?
Don't meet your heroes.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, I don't know what the term is, but yes.
Yeah, so that sounds
very
like...
much.
Yeah,
very
that's
much.
unfortunate.
Yeah. And so he got soured, and that was when he decided that he would take it upon himself to liberate South America. And he stood on the hills over Rome and made that promise. But he was the one that nobody else had before that decided that he had to liberate all of South America. He couldn't just do Venezuela because Venezuela couldn't do it on its own. Mm-hmm. So that was his vision, to unite them all in this this revolt. Based on his writings, which were extremely eloquent, by the way. I mentioned he was a wordsmith.
Right.
I do believe that he had the best of intentions. There's some ambition in there, but Washington, as much as we claim to, was ambitious. Abraham, Honest Abe, super ambitious. So yeah, a lot of these great leaders had ambition. There's no fault in that.
Right, sure.
But so yes, he had some ambition, but I do believe that he got into it with the right intentions. I don't believe that he had any notion that he could profit or benefit monetarily from this type of endeavor. In fact, in his writings before his entrance, he made it very clear that he feared losing everything. Right. So
yeah,
they didn't get into this blindly.
But the seven deadly sins always surface their head, right?
Fair.
Right, and that's one of the things, in real life, and it got him, and it leaks into our fraternity sometimes, whether it's envy or greed or whatnot, which we refer to on this podcast a lot as dudes and egos. I wonder how much that played into his ultimate demise.
Yeah, I think 100% you're right. Regardless of how noble somebody's ambition is,
right,
and their vision for it, there has to be, in any great leader, a pride and accomplishment. Right?
Sure.
And he wanted desperately for that to work.
It's almost a fear of failure. You want to have the ego that, if it works, it works. I don't want that leader. I want him says, we're going to do this and we're going to win. Right? You have to have a little bit of that gas. So otherwise, how do you inspire? All right, guys, let's go out and hopefully we do a good job. Yeah, I'm not following that, dude. We want to go out there and let's go out and let's bust some heads.
The inspiration was never a challenge for him. It was the competence of those around him to enact his vision.
Right.
And, Winston Churchill once said, the greatest argument against democracy is to spend 5 minutes with the average voter. And given my time in politics, I'll tell you, there may be some truth to that.
We've all experienced that, and I don't care what side of the aisle you're on.
It does not.
Somebody says, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this person voted," and I can't believe this person voted. So technical difficulty, don't worry about that. That's just our own problem, not yours. But I think all sides of the aisle could argue, like, they shouldn't be allowed to vote. They're uninformed. They shouldn't be allowed to vote. They're uninformed, right?
Right.
And being informed is the real thing. Just not blindly voting.
It's your responsibility.
Right. It is.
Right.
It is.
Yeah. So. And so that was, I think, his biggest downfall was, I think there was some pride there that he desperately wanted. The Gran Colombia was all of those countries to combine, those 6 countries.
Yep, it is. Yep.
He wanted all of those to be combined so desperately because he really felt that was the only way that they could keep their independence going forward.
Right.
He didn't think that they could do it if they separated, and he writes extensively about when he made that transition to king or monarch or dictator, however you want to label it.
Mm-hmm.
And he writes about being reluctant. There may be some, there may be some just speaking to that, right? Some lip service to that. But I genuinely do believe that he never intended for that to occur.
So take us back. We're in the late 1700s, early 1800s. We're going to start a country, and we need to pick a leader. You taking George Washington, or you taking Bolivar? Forget where we're landing. You're wanting that leader. Who do you want?
That's incredibly difficult to answer without knowing like the demographics and everything going on in that country.
Insert. So we're going with the personality, not your background.
I have to go with Washington. My bias is there just because of he did go the opposite direction. To your point at the very beginning of this, is that Washington, after 2 terms, right, he was already being labeled King George IV.
Right.
George Washington was.
Yeah.
And after 2 terms, he said, you know what? That is enough for any president. I'm done here. And that speaks volumes to me.
It does. It does. And I would also go with George because, like, we're boys, George. I would go with George because I feel like the stark difference in the 2 leadership styles for me, and George seemed to have the ability to find and or trust the people around him to make him better. And there was some sort of succession plan that I don't think that Bolivar had.
No.
And it's like, when he'd leave, things would run amok. But how much of that is due to maybe his lack of leadership development? And I would argue, as it ties into Masonry, is if we really want our fraternity to continue to push in the right direction, it's our leadership development that has to improve, because so many times we get into my year. No, it's our year. And how do we take this and move forward? It's all about leadership development, in my opinion. And again, push Masonry to decide in any organization, if you don't have proper leadership development, insert industry, you're done. You do not grow, you don't evolve, and you've got this one person, when he or she leaves all the secrets in the head, and you're done.
Wow. Yeah, I could not agree more. I think his biggest failure was probably the development and then trust of those around him. And if he couldn't trust those around him, he should have found a way to instill that trust, or found people that he could trust. And that because one of them, at least one, did directly stab him in the back. Yep.
Anyway, that was his Benedict Arnold.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was his Latin American Benedicto
Arnold.
But you know what? You said leave Mason, or put Masonry aside. I'm going to pull Masonry back into it. You made an excellent point to compare and kind of drive the point home from Bolivar to our lodges. It is about the development of our future leaders.
Yep.
And I don't think we could end the show on a better note than that.
No, we appreciate you, Dave, as always. Thanks for joining the Old Fashioned Masonic Podcast. Cheers.